Hey, welcome everybody to another Ham Radio Perspectives. I'm one of the normal co-hosts, K8QS, Quinn, and I got this odd thing in the background here. You probably see this leg lamp lit up, which I'll be putting in the front window of the house here shortly, and you wonder what the heck is this doing on here. Well, my latest book is about the movie A Christmas Story, and the old man, of course, has the leg lamp and all, and I've been doing all kinds of remote TV and podcast interviews. So I set this up to use with those. This is what the book looks like. You'll shoot your eye out. Life lessons from the movie A Christmas Story. What's interesting about this, and the only reason I'm bringing it up now besides to explain the leg lamp, is that the screenwriter for that movie, which is now the most popular movie in America, was Gene Shepard, who was K2ORS. Now, K2ORS is currently held by a different person, but that was Gene's one of his famous calls, and he was quite a guy. And so this was a fun book to write, both to give him kind of credit as one of the world's great storytellers, and also talk some about his hamdom. In fact, there's a great chapter in here about technology going astray, and I use ham radio as part of it for examples. So again, I'm Quinn, K8QS. This is Ham Radio Perspectives, and this is part 2 of a 2-part series we're doing on the history of the Federal Communications Commission monitoring station, which was in the Chicago area, near where I grew up, and then moved to Allegan, Michigan. And Jim, K9SE, is with me because he's the guy. He really gave us the tour with great photographs on part 1 of this video series, and then he's here for part 2. My colleague Tom, who's often on, just moved back down to Florida, and he's in the midst of all kinds of stuff and was not able to do this video with us. But Jim, it's so great to see you again. Every time I see you here, even though you look a little different now, I remember our days together in engineering at the University of Illinois. Some time ago, huh?
Long time ago. I'm glad you explained that lamp. I know it's distracting, and I think I can focus on what's at hand. Yes, I am Jim, K9SC. I used to be WN9QFL, WA9QFL during my university days. I graduated and did a stint of time. Well, I graduated, then fell in love. Not exactly in that order, and I spent some time in Peoria waiting for my wife to graduate, and got married. And she's WB9QIU. She's kept that call sign over the years, and I sort of changed from QFL to K9SC to zero call and back to K9SC. So yes, I was with the commission for 37 years. I was started out, did 6 months of training, or 5 to 6 months of training in Norfolk, Virginia. Went out to Grand Island, Nebraska, where I was with special enforcement. Special enforcement being a code word for CB enforcement. As a younger person, that was pretty exciting. We'd cover from the Rockies to east of the Mississippi, and from the Canadian border down to the Mexican border. A lot of traveling, and when you're young, that was a lot. That was pretty much easier. But I had the opportunity to go to Allegan as a training officer. So in 1979, we moved to Allegan, and I was there for 17 and a half years to the end in 1996.
And just to clarify, Jim, Allegan is in southwest Michigan, kind of south of Grand Rapids, where I live, and maybe north of Kalamazoo, if some people can remember that.
Kalamazoo and Holland, Michigan.
There you go. Excellent. Okay. And so you're going to take us up to part 2 here, the early history at Allegan, and then on up to, well, you'll see the sad ending in 1996.
Okay. Now, Quinn, we should mention that, maybe they should pause the video and
Oh yeah,
download
good
the
point.
handout.
So there's a link down below on YouTube. I'll try to remember to put this when I post the video on QRZ as well. A link to the, if I can do it properly, a link to the handout, which is just great and gives all kinds of specific information about the equipment you'll see. Jim will talk a little bit about some of it, but this will take you much further. So be sure to get that handout too.
So when I talk, I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail. You know, my point is, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, you know, what can I say? So we started out and, you know, we did the 40s, the war period, and up until, you know, the end of 40s during the first session. And this session will pick up in the 50s. Unfortunately, I do not have a lot of pictures from the 50s. Really, there's only, you know, 2 pictures, this one here. And the main thing to note from this picture is, if you recall from the first video, Halcrafters was the predominant receiver for, you know, HF receivers, for all receivers, as a matter of fact, during the war years. Post-war, Collins came into its own, and that was the predominant receiver throughout the 60s, 50s, and 60s. And we'll see a change in the future. But here we have historic, it's a direction finding position. You know, we see the Collins receiver predominantly placed, and Hammer and Super Pro off to its right, and other ancillary equipment. The only other picture I have from the 50s is this picture. I like this picture because the calendar on the wall to the left of the rack that allow me to place this picture, you know, in time properly. What this is Alex W8FLA. He stayed in the area, and he was a source of a lot of information during my years at Allegan. He's fiddling with a reel-to-reel audio recorder, and which is new because that was a German development, and after the war they lost their patent to it, and it was adopted by the rest of the country. What I find ironic is, to the right of the audio rack is that old ancient wax cylinder recorder is still predominant. And the other picture from the 50s is the picture of the building as it was in its early years. And from that, the only other pictures I had from the 50s is some outside pictures. One thing about the staff at the monitoring stations, they did a lot of their own work. You know, they did a lot of fabrication of equipment. Allegan had a pretty good machine shop with a lathe, sheet metal shear, bending machines. So they did a lot of their own fabrication. You know, there was a different class of engineer than what I ever became. You know, they designed it and they built it. But here they're obviously putting in a tower base. What's nice about these pictures is the background. You know, you see some of the field, you see some of the parallel transmission lines going out to the rhombic fields. Next picture, we see another view of the monitoring station and the garage. And lastly, we see the beverage field. You can see the rhombic field, so the taller antennas. So they're building this the tower. You know, it looks like it's going to be a pretty impressive tower. There it is. All that concrete for such a short tower, and you know, that looks like
wow.
a CB. It looks like a CB antenna.
It does.
All I can say is, in September 11th, 1958, Class D CB came into existence. I know some of the old timers at the station made reference to having a CB antenna, but I really don't know what they did with it. I don't know if they were surveying the bands to see, one, to make sure that amateurs got off the old former 11-meter amateur band, and or they're just trying to see how Class DCB was taking on. I don't know. That's something that shall remain a mystery. And the only other picture I think I have from the 50s is this overhead aerial picture, 1957. If you recall the previous picture from the 40s, there was an aerial picture. Not much has changed. The only thing that's different is the trees they planted are growing. There was a lot of forested area in the 40s in the center of the property. That has been cleared. The DF, Adcock DF is still where it's at. On the right-hand portion of the screen, the only difference is there's no turnaround circle. They no longer have to drive out to the DF because by the early 50s, the DF antenna has been remote controlled. This takes us into the 60s now, and we see a picture of the DF position. We see the Collins receivers, a number of, 2 Collins receivers, and Hammerman off to the right. Now the operator is operating the DF. There's a remote control panel, and he has to manually rotate. You turn the knob inside, on the control panel, and with Sulzens or synchro motors, he's able to cause the Adcock antenna to rotate, and he has to manually tune the Adcock antenna until he gets an oral gnaw, and then he reads the azimuth off the alidade on the control unit.
And in terms of just 1 second, Jim, on that one. In terms of triangulating with another station, how would you have done that?
I don't have the picture. Is there the plotting boards?
Mm-hmm.
Each had strings. So you just place the other magnet, and you just place the string on the line of bearing. You get your other bearings from the other monitoring stations. All the bearings were sent to Washington, D.C. for processing, but each station had their own string board, so they could, plot bearings themselves to see where the station was at.
Great, thanks.
Life improved in a couple months. We see the same equipment panel, except the Collins receiver has been moved to the left, and they got 2 Collins receivers stacked on top of each other. What we have below the DF control unit is called the visual integrator, and it visually displays the nulls on the control unit. You see a CRT there, and you see a propeller shape pattern. The operator would rotate a dial, and it has parallel lines. It'd line that up over the propeller, get just balanced on there, and then read off the azimuth from the alidade on the control unit. Another picture. This is the HF and VHF technical measurement position. Hal Crafter's receiver and some NEMS Clark VHF, UHF receivers. A mobile monitoring van, I should say a microwave van. In the 60s, vans became more popular, especially as the VHF, UHF frequencies were being more common.
So this was not used for HF at all?
It could be. I mean, there were HF receivers in there. The vans were primarily for VHF and UHF. This, of course, this van here is microwave. Had similar vans that had VHF and UHF equipment to do monitoring. This picture and the previous 4 pictures were sent to Washington. They requested pictures from monitoring stations to be used in a magazine article. And in 1963, there was an article in QST, and even though it says a day at the FCC Rural Monitoring Station, one of the first pictures I have superimposed here is identical to this picture that I was showing previously, and that was in QST. I moved into the late 60s, early 70s now. Not much to comment. The Collins receiver still. You can see updated DF remote control unit in operation. Not much to really comment on. This is the technical measurement position for HF through VHF. We see some NEMS Clark receivers and stuff. Look at the handout, and you get all the details on the equipment. This is a plat of the facility showing the orientation of the rhombics and the beverage antennas. What we see here in this plat, though, is in the middle, left middle, is what's called a Type W direction finder. In the late 70s, early 80s, all the Adcock antennas were replaced with a DF antenna. Well, I'll show you a better picture coming up. This is a picture aerial view from the early 80s. We see the building, the new project has been added. And here is the DF antenna. It's called a Type W direction finder. It's a circularly disposed antenna array. That an array consists of 60 antennas in a 450-foot diameter circle. And the center building contains the goniometer to make this all work. Some additional pictures showing the property from the early 80s. And a close-up of the Type W direction finder showing the goniometer hut and the individual antennas.
Did that hut have to be heated?
No, not really. It wasn't anything out there. It's just all mechanical equipment out there. Maybe there was vacuum tube equipments for the drivers for the Celsons and whatnot. So it might have been insulated. I don't remember. Now, I don't have any pictures of equipment inside the monitoring station from the 80s or 90s. So I have to substitute the Grand Island monitoring station. This was taken in the early 80s. I made a trip back to Grand Island with our newborn daughter, and all the equipment you see here, which is outlined in the handout, this is all typical equipment. All the equipment we see here in these pictures is what every monitoring station had, including Allegan. So even though I don't have pictures of the equipment at Allegan, this is the type of equipment we did have. Now we get into 1995, the twilight of the monitoring station. By 1995, we knew that the close was near. I guess I went out and took pictures of the facility so I could remember it in its glory. Here's the front-on picture of the building with all its antennas. A picture out in the field now. During this time, the Type W antenna was going to be replaced with an interferometer DF. So we built the new antenna. The new interferometer antenna was co-located within the type WDF and beyond. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on. And one more picture that I took. So next picture, we're talking 1996. This is the end of the station. At this point, there are 6 people left. We got five staff. This is not go through the staff. This is Dave. He's getting the microwave truck. The microwave truck is going to go to Chicago. I'll be driving over to Chicago in a couple days. Dave was the custodian at Allegan, and he transferred down to Powder Springs. Our senior engineer, he transfers to Detroit. A couple monitoring techs. Daryl goes to Gettysburg, along with the Brock. And these pictures, you can see the receivers. A lot of the stuff is missing from the equipment racks, but we see a Raykel 6793A receiver that was the workhorse receiver during the 80s and 90s. Roger, you can see operating now. The type WDF was updated. Before it was all mechanical. You had that long persistence phosphor CRT. It's been mated to a computer, so the computer takes all that audio from the receiver and comes up with the bearing and passes it on to the computer, and the computer plots the bearings as it gets data from all the other monitoring stations. Roger was a native of Allegan, and he went to the Navy and retired from Navy and came back home to Allegan. Roger then transferred to the HFDF facility in Columbia.
Was he a ham?
No, he was not. August 16th, 1969, end of watch. The last day, we closed up at noontime and they locked the gate. Went home, and the following Monday, I went to Chicago. I want to have a little postscript, do a virtual tour of the Allegan monitoring station via Google Earth. Here we see Google Earth from 2024. If you look closely, you can see the new interferometer DF. I've outlined the location, or annotated a picture to show the locations of the antennas that comprise the interferometer array. Each baseline is 484 meters, or 1,558 feet. Another picture based upon imagery from the Allegan County GIS system. You can see that. I zoom in on the DF, and you can clearly see where the Type C DF was, where it was placed there 45 years ago. So that's it. That's my presentation. How many years?
Wow.
40 some years of history in a couple minutes.
Yeah, and as you said, you transferred down to Chicago too.
Talk about ancient equipment, it's all the ancient stuff, looking at that picture. There's one, the infamous T150 transmitter that introduced me to monitoring stations at an early age. I had harmonics, and I was sent an advisory notice from a couple monitoring stations. What's left of that picture, you don't see the hand key that's below the T150. I still have that. And the Heathkit SWR bridge above the HW32 is all that I have left from that era.
That brings back great memories for me, seeing you there in a picture of you and what you looked like, and remembering you from the days we had together in the Ham Club, the Sinton Amateur Radio Club at the University of Illinois in Champaign. And the T150. I think Tom and I talk in another video about he had one of those and sold it to me, and I could never figure out what frequency I was on. I mean, talking about the main frequency, not the harmonics. It was bad. And so I got a bunch of those official operator notes as well, and a couple of things from the FCC saying that I was in some wild frequency, competing with the some African shortwave station or whatever. This is so great for you to do this, and I'm so glad you had some of these photos and that you saved them. I would have been afraid that all of this would have just been tossed out,
Yeah.
Jim, and we wouldn't have had any history.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions that I might be able to answer?
Well, you mentioned going out in the van sometimes. Do you have any recollections of going out in any particular parts of the country, or maybe what a typical week was like?
Well, it's broader than that. It's what we did in the monitoring vans, the same thing we did in the stations, and we purpose was to survey what's going on. Doing the vans was probably more enforcement oriented. I don't. My time in the van was limited. I probably spent more time, covering watches and stuff for the guys, and the typical, I mean, just there's so many things to try to get out here. I mean, there was a normal routine at the monitoring station. The main thing was back in the 50s and 60s was just to monitor the spectrum to see what activity there was, to log stations, identify stations, and record that. And then each monitoring station had a monitoring schedule, and it varied from other monitoring stations. So over the course of a month, the entire spectrum would constantly be monitored. Of course, as they're cruising the assigned band segments, they come across the amateurs. I don't think they were purposely looking to get sites, in the amateur band. It's just that they were expected to cover the certain frequency bands and document that they were indeed monitoring, either coming up with monitoring, what they call monitoring index slips, so it was cataloged, and any violations they came up with.
What would happen, Jim, if you ran across a teletype station, and non-ham bands we're talking about here? What would you crank up the teletype and try and tune it in?
Yeah, we could. I mean, that changed with technology. Of course, the teletype machines we had, it was all machines. That changed. Hell Electronics came out with electronic decoders, and then it gave you more flexibility.
Right.
I would also state, forgot my train of thought. Another thing that the monitor stations would do, I know at Allegan, they would spend a lot of time, let's just backtrack. Back in the 40s and 50s, all your communications was done at HF. There wasn't that much VHF, going on. So, all your maritime traffic, was all HF, either CW or teletype. The monitoring station, our Allegan station, would monitor the Mississippi and the rivers, and every morning the barges on the rivers would communicate with their headquarters and give position reports, and that was all done on single sideband. And what they would measure, the frequency of the single sideband. They could, with selective filters, they could actually measure the suppressed carrier and, issue violations as as appropriate.
I remember a case, Jim, just to interrupt you for 1 second. I remember a case, was I still in Chicago then? I must have still been in Chicago, maybe not, but where there was some type of boat off of and Lake Erie, somewhere that was giving out SOSs, and all kinds of hams picked that up, and then they had the FCC involved, and there were people tracking with helicopters and all. Do you remember anything about that?
I have no idea. There's just so
No?
many things going on. I mean, there were a lot of hoaxes and whatnot, and it was,
Yeah.
Ohio at that point. I don't know. But you look at technology, how things changed. You know, back in the old days, I remember when the monitoring van got a mobile telephone. Of course, back then that was IMTS. That was, high band VHF. But you look at today and what's happening on HF is just not like it used to be. HF isn't as important as it was in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. It's been replaced by new technology. Today the barges on the rivers, they don't need to have HF. They'll have it for backup, but they'll call their headquarters on a cell phone. So all of
Yeah.
it was redundant. So I think you know that's probably why the monitoring stations closed. There wasn't the need. Yeah, there's still a need for direction finding capabilities and whatnot, and that was all done through remote controls. So,
Do you have any recollections of having to go out and make a call on a ham or CB station that was repeatedly violating, and you finally just had to go and shut them down?
that was always, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes, they knew they're doing wrong. I remember doing, pirate broadcasters, and there was some amateur stuff. Just they'll get warned, and just trying to get the lawyers in DC to take the case to the district or the U.S. attorney, because the U.S. attorney has to take the case and prosecute them. So
you
there's a
couldn't
lot of
just come in, and if there was a problem, you just couldn't come in and confiscate the equipment.
not without a warrant. So
Yeah.
we had to get the feds involved. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we were feds, but our capabilities were very limited.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're talking federal here, and so you can't just go in and do that. Well,
Once they get
Jim,
to Chicago, I mean, there was marketing cases. Of course, back then you had all the CB amplifiers and whatnot. So it's a big case and stuff. But I don't know what's happening nowadays.
well, this has
I don't
just
know.
been great. What's your any one memory you want to leave with us? And don't use the memory of locking up the building either, even though I'm sure that made a big impression on you.
I think the best days I had were in Allegan. Just the in station. I mean, it was so hard when we got the message to close, and they came and hired I was the acting engineer in charge, during that close down phase, and I contracted outfit out of Kalamazoo to come up and take the towers down at the monitoring station, and I arranged for them to, on their way back to Kalamazoo, stop by my location and take down my 90-foot tower. And it was sad leaving.
Yeah.
What can I say?
Yeah, the FCC reminds me of what I learned in my beginning economics class at Illinois when we were there together, and that was that there's an insatiable demand and inadequate resources to go around.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the FCC trying to take care of its regulatory duties, it's never going to be adequately staffed to take care of everything. But you did a lot of good work, and we really appreciate it.
Times have changed. They closed all the monitoring stations, and towards the end, we were doing a lot of the same functions as the district office. We were no longer just monitoring. We're going out to inspecting stations. We're inspecting maritime stations, the party boats on the lakes. We were
Mm.
inspecting broadcast stations, so a lot of the same things. So then, I went to Chicago. I spent 17 and a half years in Allegan and 17 and a half years in Chicago. And, after 17 and a half years, I saw the writing on the wall. I decided it was time for me to get out. And after I retired, 10 years ago, this year, they closed more stations, more offices down. The Detroit office was closed. So now the Chicago office, has to cover a much larger geographic area. I don't know how they're doing it.
Hmm. Well, Jim, thanks a lot, buddy. K9SE, Jim, you can look him up on QRZ if you'd like, and fire him a nice email. Let him know you're appreciative. Again, we've got a link down below on YouTube for the handout. And one of the great things about doing these videos with you, Jim, is to renew our acquaintance. So I look forward to seeing you soon, somewhere between here and northern Indiana, where you now live, and we'll catch up on old times. You've got some great photos of me too. Don't you ever put those online, you rascal?
Yep.
From the old days.
Back when we all had hair on top.
Oh gosh.
Oh, and you had a lot more hair than I had on top.
Yeah, it's true. I had long, thick hair back then. It's hard to believe. So 73, everybody. Thanks for watching. This is Ham Radio Perspectives. I'm Quinn, K8QS. Please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Put a note down below, any kind of questions and all, and Jim will follow up with you as needed. So thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, give me questions. If I get a lot of questions, common questions, I might just put together a paper and ask Quinn to host it on his on a YouTube site or however he wants to.
Yeah, we can do that. That'll be great. Otherwise, we'll just do another video, which is just straight Q&A.
7-3, guys.
7-3, buddy.